Okay, we are live. Hi, this is William Ramsey. Welcome to William Ramsey Investigates. On today's show, I have a very special guest, a returning guest. His name is Mike Cox. COX is his last name. Last time he was on the show, we talked about a two-part book. The first part of the book was titled The Texas Rangers Wearing the Cinco Peso, 1821 to 1900. So you can go back and listen to that in my archives. And that's the first part. The second part of that book is The Texas Rangers Wearing Time of the Rangers, the Texas Rangers, 1900 to present. So the first part, again, is our earlier interview. But today we're going to talk about a really fascinating book, part of history that I didn't know. I lived in Texas, Dallas for a while, so I'm kind of familiar with this type of space in between Austin, Waco, and Dallas involving this. And the title of the book we're going to talk about is Train Crash at Crush, Texas, America's Deadliest Publicity Stunt. It was published in 2019. Mike Cox is a native Texan born in Amarillo long enough ago to be in the sophomore class of baby boomers. He began his newspaper career at the San Angelo Standard-Times in 1967, reviewing Texas-related books. In addition to reviewing books, Mike has also written over 35 published nonfiction titles, and his best-selling and longest work is the two-volume History of the Texas Rangers that I just mentioned. And his website is his full name with author at the end. So it's www.mikecoxauthor.com. And some of his other titles, I'm not going to go into all 35, but some of the other ones are Legends and Lore of the Texas Capitol, Texas Ranger Tales, Hard Riding Stories from the Lone Star State, Gunfight Insights in Texas Ranger History, Time of the Rangers, which I already mentioned, Remembering Texas Lawmen. And those are just a few of the many titles he's done. He's very well knowledgeable about Texas history in particular. So I'm delighted to have him back. Mike Cox, welcome back to the show. Thanks for agreeing to the interview.
I appreciate being back on. And if I could correct one thing,
please do.
My website is all one word, MikeCoxAuthor.com.
Okay.
I think you used an older website, but.
Okay, sorry about that. So I'll put that in the show notes. Sorry about that. Sure. So for people who may not have heard our last interview about the Texas Rangers, can you kind of talk a little bit about what led you to write this book, Train Crash at Crush, Texas?
Sure. I've worked quite a bit with a publishing company in Charleston, South Carolina, History Press. And my editor there, I've done probably, 4, 5, 6 books with him. He approached me and he said, would you like to do a book on the crash at Crush? And I didn't have to ask him what that was because, and I'll get to that in a minute, but I certainly was familiar with it. And I told him, no, I don't think I want to do that. And I don't know why I said that now, but I suggested a friend of mine, an old newspaper buddy of mine. And so I got the two of them together. And I didn't hear any more about it for, 2 or 3 months. And I asked my friend, well, how are you going on the book? And he said, oh, I decided not to do it. And I said, well, why? And he said, well, it's too much work. And I can certainly agree with that. So I picked up the project, and I'm really glad I did because it's really an interesting story. And as I said, it's one that I knew about. I went to a junior high school in Austin, and it was right next to the mainline railroad tracks of the Missouri, Kansas, and Texas Railroad, better known as the Katy. So I was in junior high school long enough ago where there were still passenger trains. Katy this was pre-Amtrak back in the early 60s. So every day that Katy Texas Special came through past the school on its way to San Antonio via Austin from Dallas. So I knew about what the Katy was. And then about the same time when I was in probably the 7th, 8th grade, we were studying Texas history, and the Austin American Statesman ran a story on the Katy crash, which I still have and kept all those years. So that's how I came to write the book, and it's just such a cool story. It's been optioned as a movie now.
Oh, wow.
option is a long way from production, but still, it's the first step, and it's the first one of my books to actually get a contracted option.
Wow, congratulations.
Thanks.
It's cool. I mean, there's a lot of history, and it's like a snapshot in time too of the late 1900s as well. Can you kind of talk about Texas in that era and the importance of trains and the technology, and kind of Katy stands for Kansas, Texas, and what was the other state it
Well,
was?
it's a Missouri, Kansas, and
Missouri,
Texas
Kansas,
Railroad.
Texas. That's right.
Again, great marketing on the part of the company. At some point, it occurred to them. A lot of people started calling it the Katy Railroad because in MKT, obviously the K and the T are together, and it occurred to somebody, oh, that sounds like Katy. So their advertising folks drew a sort of 1890s Gibson girl style woman who they named Katy, and she became uh, the image of the Katy Railroad, which was pretty cool. So really, I list Katy, the advertising gal, as the first character in my book. But railroads, of course, did play a huge part in Texas. Texas was sort of slow in getting railroads. Didn't really have an out of state railroad connection until 1872, I believe it was, and it was the MKT Railroad. It started in St. Louis, Missouri, and moved through Missouri to Oklahoma, which at that time, of course, was not a state, and then came into Texas after crossing the Red River at Denison, Texas, turning Denison into a Wild West, wild and woolly town back in the 1870s. But the railroads grew in Texas pretty rapidly after that. By the early 1880s, within about 10 years, Texas had been crossed by the first Southern Transcontinental Railroad, the Southern Pacific Railroad, then known as the Texas Pacific. Uh, so that created, of course, towns sprang up along the railroad, and it really helped develop modern Texas, and it really was I guess, the beginning of high technology in Texas.
Right. So that was like the technology of that era was this steam train. And there's a map in your book showing kind of the route going through from Waco to Dallas of the MKT. But there were changes being made as these were being upgraded, right? And that's kind of the precedent to the train crash at Texas, right?
Well, it was one of the things that led to it. Uh, but to get back to the times, the mid 1890s were a pretty rough time in American history. In 1893, the nation went into the worst financial slump to that point in its history, and there was also a big, very very complicated issue about whether the U.S. currency should be based on gold or silver, which became a huge political fight, and it took me a long time to kind of wade through that and figure it out. And then in 1893, a World's Fair opened in Chicago, and that's critical because the guy who came up with the idea of crashing two perfectly good railroad locomotives together uh, for profit uh, lived in Chicago, so it all
Streeter.
kind of tied in together. Yes, that was a character by the name of Alfred Streeter, and really, I guess he'd be the second interesting character in the book because as I said, he's the one who invented crashing railroads for fun and profit. Um, and he did so in 1896. Uh, he had kind of worked his way up uh, from being what they called a news butch, which was a kid, uh, ragamuffin sort of kid who would peddle newspapers and candy, cigars, anything he could carry on his person. And whenever a train would stop at a station, well, the news butch would get on board and go down the aisles of the passenger cars and, peddle his products. Well, Streeter did that, and one of the tricks he did, and other newsboys, kind of the same thing. Think of when you fly on an airplane, if you're reading a newspaper, what do you do with it? Well, you usually leave the newspaper in your seat when you leave the plane. Well, people did the same thing in trains. So this kid was smart enough he would repeat his rounds and go and pick up the newspapers that he'd sold for a penny or two and get them reorganized and sell them again. So he was that kind of a character. And then he went to work for the railroads, which so many people did back then. And Chicago was a major center for both railroad trafficking and manufacture of railroad parts and equipment. The Pullman cars, which were the cars that folks could sleep in when they were traveling across the country, were manufactured in Chicago. So Streeter sort of moved up through the ranks in a railroad company and went from being a brakeman, which is a very dangerous job, and eventually became a conductor. But in between, he was on a crew that would go out and handle train crashes. If a train went off the track, or if two trains happened to collide, he was on the crew that would use steam equipment to get the debris off the railroad track and get the track up and running again as soon as possible. Well, one of the things that he noticed in doing this was that people love a train wreck. I guess that's no surprise, but people still love a train wreck, a metaphorical train wreck, i.e. disasters. So he noticed that people would come out if it was reachable, come out to the scene of a railroad crash and take pictures and pose next to the debris. And he apparently was an inventive sort, and at some point in 1896, a light bulb went off, and he thought, why don't I stage the crash of two perfectly good locomotives together and charge people money to see it? And so he talked a railroad company up there in Illinois into donating two obsolete engines in exchange for a piece of the gate. And then Streeter started advertising that he was going to have a great show where he was going to have two steam engines crash together. Sold tickets, and the first show came off near south of Columbus, Ohio, in the spring of 1896. So that's some people say that the so-called crash at Crush, which I'll explain better in a second, but some people say that it was invented in Texas, but that's one Texas brag we can't claim. It was invented by a guy from Chicago who was a quite interesting character, as I said.
Yeah, he was kind of like a showman, like a P.T. Barnum of the Texas. It was very financially successful too, right?
Well, later, he didn't do too well at staging the train crashes. He probably made a little walking around money, but on one of the crashes he did, too many people snuck in, just like folks used to sneak in under the circus tent. Well, he had the same problem with these crashes. So I think he made some money, but he within a year or so, maybe 2 years, he got out of the business. And what he did do, showing that he did have an inventive bent, he invented some better parts for brake systems for the railroad industry, got the patents on them, and made a bunch of money. I mean, he ended up becoming what would be a millionaire today if he wasn't a millionaire back then. He became quite wealthy, which kind of led to his demise later on. But anyway, it's at some point the general passenger agent for the Katy Railroad, who was stationed in Dallas or worked out of Dallas. Uh, Obviously, he was a very literate sort and read newspapers, and the crash that Streeter put on in Ohio uh, made the newspapers. And a fellow by the name of William George Crush, known by most of his contemporaries as Billy Crush, uh, thought, that might be a way to both, if the Katy did that, it'd be a way to a get a bunch of free ink by staging a train crash in Texas, and B, the railroad could sell excursion tickets all along its line and work with other railroads to have a ticket sales system and get a lot of people to Texas to see the crash of two steam engines. Well, he was able to sell the idea to the brass, and Crush must have been a pretty good organizer because he really did put together a great what must have been a great show, and he showed too that he could not only think outside the box but think outside the boxcar. When he finally started setting up the crash, they found two 1870s steam engines that had seen their better days, and had the Katy shops, uh, get them up to standard to run again. And one was painted green and one was painted red, which was a dramatic flare. And then also Crush had the bright idea of selling advertising by stretching canvas over the sides of these box cars so that vendors could or advertisers could buy space. A big hotel in Dallas, one of the put up an ad for it, and then he also advertised the circus and other things. So it was really a very impressive event, and or would be an impressive event. Well, Crush went up and down the main line for Katy in Texas, and he found a site that was 13 miles north of Waco. That the landscape made it sort of a natural amphitheater. There was high ground on either side of the railroad track where it would be easy for people to stand and see the crash. So they brought in a large crew, something like 500 railroad people, and basically built a little city. They built a depot and a telegraph shack or two, and other sorts of amenities. They provided. They brought water in as they got closer to the event. They brought railroad cars of water in, and actually laid pipe and had spigots throughout the viewing area where people could get a free drink on the Katy Railroad, but they weren't giving out any free drinking containers. They had at each faucet they had a cup, I presume a tin cup, but it was chained to the faucet, so somebody couldn't walk off with one of the cups. But it showed the detail that Billy Crush looked into as he began developing this event. And so the next thing he did, once he had the site pretty well set up, is a real intense promotional campaign. The doomed railroad, or the doomed railroad engines, as they called them, were taken on a tour to various places along the Katy line, and Crush proved to be something of a real genius in getting the publicity that he wanted. He knew how to carry and feed newspaper reporters. One thing he had was the ability to give out free passes to the Katy system, and of course that's part of the old freedom of the press joke. Back then the reporters were weren't paid very much, and they were always happy to get a freebie. So Crush was a very hail fellow, well meant sort of guy, and through that was able to really engineer, so to speak, some good publicity. And then
Right.
he
So
did
he's
some more.
yeah, he's very savvy. Sorry, please continue.
Oh, he really was a savvy character. I tried to learn as much about him as I could because he was really an interesting character. But uh, he he later married, but never had any kids, and so I was never able to find any descendants of his. And so if he had letters or a diary or anything like that, they've either been destroyed or uh, somebody somewhere that has not heard about the Crush has them, which I don't think is very likely. Uh, but among the other things he did, he hired a photographer out of Waco, which I said is only 13 miles south of the little instant town of Crush, Texas, which he, by the way, named after himself, which I think he was well deserved since he came up with the idea. Anyway, he hired this character named Jervis Dean, and to take photographs of the crash. So they built a special wooden viewing area for VIPs and also a stand for Dean to take photographs of the event. They also invited a character by the name of Emil Rector, who was a pioneer in the film industry, and Crush brought him in to actually make a moving picture of the crash. So all he had to do then was set a date, which they set for September 15th, 1896, and the on
And
that
they
day.
right.
I'm
Sorry to
sorry.
interrupt, but they like tested it out. Didn't he have engineers who said, "Yeah, this is what the consequences will be," and they had already thought they safety tested everything, right?
Yes, sort of they certainly tested the engines, and they had did some mock once the equipment arrived at the site. Well, they did a test run short of crashing into each other, uh, and so yes, that part of the work was done. And during the process of uh, fitting up the steam engines, at least one Katy train engineer approached Crush and said, "Hey, if you do this, uh, there's a high danger that one or both of the steam boilers will explode." And I think it went all the way up to the president of the railroad, and somehow, and again, there are no records to support this, uh, but somehow, either through Crush's gift of gab, somehow he convinced the higher ups that it would be safe, and the engineers' uh, prediction that there could be trouble was, in the end, ignored.
Right. And but he was such, like you said, he was such a successful promoter that more people showed up than expected, right?
Yes, it was amazing. The crowd estimates are always suspect and hard to confirm, but there were some evidence or some sources that said some 30,000 people showed up for the big event. I've seen other sources that said 40K. I've seen it all the way up to 50K. Either way, either from 30, 40, or 50, on that day, which was September 15th, 1896, uh, Crush, Texas, was the biggest city in Texas. It had more, there were more people there than lived in Galveston, which was one of the big cities, than lived in Waco, which was a big city. Houston and Dallas were both not, I mean, they were growing and they were large cities, but they were not as large as Crush was, nor was San Antonio. So people poured in from all over, primarily from all over Texas. I saw some person's account that said people came from as far away as New York. I don't I don't believe that. I certainly never. I didn't ever find any evidence of that. I'm sure some people came from elsewhere in the Katy system, which could have been all the way up uh, to St. Louis, but I don't think he might have came from New York.
But
Excuse me.
but Mike, that was kind of how they made the money, was getting people to the event, right? That was
Yes,
the
yes, they
revenue
didn't.
generator.
They didn't charge Streeter had charged an admission, but the way the railroad did it was to uh, just ask people to, or sell tickets to get there, and they had it at a remote location. Now they still had some issue with uh, people slipping in and trying to see it for free. Primarily, those were local residents. And Trump, I mean, or Crush had, uh, I think he thought he'd covered everything. I mean, he hired a bunch of specially commissioned McLennan County folks to be constables. They had a rest and law enforcement authority there for that part of the county. He Crush Crush had a white horse that he rode, and he rode around the crowd trying to make sure that people stayed back within the safety lines that they had set up. And I don't know if he simply did not have enough people to control that larger crowd, which is what I think. But it enabled people on the eastern side of the crash site to a lot of people slipped in and filled up that eastern side. Now, to to put this in a geographical orientation, for those not familiar with Texas, you can pretty much draw a straight line from San Antonio north through Austin, Waco, and then up to Dallas. So that uh, the event then was on a north-south axis. Well, on the west side of that axis, on the which is to say the tracks, is where Crush had the viewing area set up, and again they cleverly licensed vendors to sell lemonade there, and probably there was a lot of whiskey and beer sold, even though that's not mentioned in the stories. Maybe even some gambling, um, but they also set up a large circus tent and had a food operation in there where the railroad uh, served food. But anyway, so all of the people who came in via train to see the event, almost all of them were on the west side of the tracks. Uh, the footprint of Interstate 35 covered up some of that area, but a lot of it's still there, and a lot of it's still just farmland. Farmers for years plowed up. Well, I give that away. I better not give that away. I'll tell later on what the farmers did. But so that was a problem, having people slip in.
Right. I think you said that there were 30 special excursion trains. So, like, it was a big event. People were being drawn in from all over Texas, right?
Yeah, they were coming in from all over. Uh, what they would do is they would come to the site. Obviously, they did not park that many railroad passenger trains in that area. Uh, they would come in and then back up, discharge all the paying passengers, and then back up. Like for instance, there was a larger rail yard at Hillsboro, which is north of there, and so a lot of the trains backed up on the main line to Hillsboro. Some backed up down to or back down to Waco. So that's how they handled that. But yeah, there I think it was 33 train loads of people came in, and they were ready to party. I mean, if you look at some of the pictures taken by this guy Jervis Dean, there's one that just shows before the crash. It just shows the ground where the spectators are, just covered with trash. So I don't know if the railroad ended up cleaning up all that paper and bottle trash or not, but they certainly didn't have any. Didn't look like they had thought to have any trash cans on the site. Maybe they did. Maybe they were full.
And you have a lot of those pictures in the book. You have a lot of Dean stuff before the crowd got to the wreck, the crowd at the wreck. So a lot of
Yes.
his photographs are here, the trains just as they struck. So really fascinating little snapshot of history there. So what happened next when the day of the event, September 15th, 1896?
Well, the big day. One weird thing about September 15th, 1896, and I've never figured this out, and I've never seen any mention in any of the newspaper coverage. Why in the world would such a promoter as Billy Crush have decided to do it on a Tuesday? It doesn't make sense. It is amazing he got as many people as he did on a Tuesday, but that excluded school kids and people who had jobs that could have come to the site if they'd done it on a Saturday. Probably didn't do it on a Sunday because of people going to church. But anyway, that's an interesting thing. But the crowd built all day long. It was a typical hot Texas day. I mean, a lot of people think September 15th is fall, and it is in some places in the nation, but not in Texas generally. So this huge crowd built up. Crush worked pretty hard to try to keep everybody, as I said, where they should be, and finally even threatened to cancel the event if people didn't move back, because everybody was trying to get the best view they possibly could. But finally, they had a telegraph set at each of the ends where a train was. They were I forget not exactly, but they were a mile or so apart, just far enough apart to build up enough speed before they crashed together. So they were able to communicate with the locomotive engineers there that way and get the word to them that we're ready to go. And then as the engineers were ready to push back on the throttle, Crush dropped his hat took his hat off his head and dropped it down, and that was the signal to go. And so the trains started building up speed. The crews, which included of course the engineer and a fireman, jumped out of the cabs of the locomotives before they built up enough speed to make that dangerous. One hot dog engineer waited until the very last second, and everybody was scared to death that for some reason he had opted not to get out of the train, or had gotten stuck, or something bad had happened to him. But he was just showboating, and he was the last guy to drop out. So up in the photo stand, this guy Jarvis Dean was snapping away on the shutter and captured pictures of the locomotives when they were still just separated, and then he took one picture just as they closed, and then, unexpected but predicted by one of the engineers, the two trains crashed together. They were going an estimated 50 miles an hour apiece. Never was hugely good at math, but I do understand that when you have something moving 50 miles an hour, the actual force of a collision, if the other object is going 50 miles an hour, is 100 miles an hour. So it was a lot of mass involved in those heavy trains, and a lot of force involved. So they crashed together quite spectacularly. I mean, Crush got exactly what he had promised to deliver, with one unfortunate exception, and that was that the boilers did indeed explode, and that sent hot shrapnel out into the crowd, including a inch and a half long bolt from one of the trains that pierced the eye of this one of the eyes of this photographer, pulling him out of the game. But he snapped the shutter just as the explosion occurred. So it's a really remarkable picture where you can actually see the debris heading in his direction right before he got hit.
Right, and then
Amazingly,
it blew up like a grenade, like just tiny
yeah,
little
it's
parts is
just
what
like
it
a
looks like.
grenade going
Yeah,
off, a giant grenade
yeah.
going off. And amazingly, the photographer was not killed, but two of the spectators were killed. Uh, there's been a lot of incorrect things published about the crash, and one of them says that three people were killed at the scene. Actually, two people were killed by the flying debris. Uh, six or so, somewhere between 6 and 9, I can't remember, were injured, uh, and the other fatality occurred after the crash, as the trains were picking people up and taking them back to whatever station they'd purchased a ticket from. Well, one guy apparently had been overserved during the event, was drunk and was trying to walk between one car and another of the cars, and was so drunk that he fell off the train and got run over by the train. So and killed. I still count that as a crush-related fatality, but it was not directly connected to the explosion itself. Crush, to his credit, once he realized that the crash had injured and killed people, uh, you know, ordered one of the trains to immediately or as soon as possible take the victims south to Waco. One of the interesting things I learned in researching this book is that the major railroad companies uh, uh, hired and actually kept a doctor on the payroll as a you know consultant in each of the major communities along their route. And of course, Waco was a big Waco center. I mean, a big railroad center with a lot of different lines going through. So Crush had or the Katy Railroad had a doctor on retainer there in Waco. So of course they didn't have a hospital. There was a large, nice hotel downtown. So the injured and dead were taken by train to Waco from the train station. They were taken by carriage to the this hotel where a doctor treated those, and there was a a surgeon in Waco, and like I said, Waco at that time was one of Texas's major cities, so that's kind of explains why they had a fair amount of people and talent there. But this surgeon was European trained in medicine and really apparently quite talented for the day. So uh, no one thought that this photographer would even survive. But the surgeon there at the hotel, which again is pretty amazing, uh, operated on the guy, removed the bolt from his eye. The bolt had actually gone all the way through his eye and had penetrated into the brain, which would kill most people. But apparently, uh, this photographer, it was his lucky day in a way because the bolt apparently injected itself in a part of the brain that didn't uh, cause him to lose any particular function or that was ever reported. Uh, and I thought that was a pretty interesting thing. Well, of course, Crush, because of the deaths, got even more publicity than he had imagined. Uh, the legend is that he was immediately summoned to the corporate headquarters in St. Louis and summarily fired. Um, but that is just a legend. He was summoned to headquarters. He went to Waco and spent the night, and then caught the next fast Katy train to St. Louis the next morning. Uh, but the president of the railroad sort of said, "Well, you got us a lot of good publicity and made us some money, but don't do it again." I mean, that's conjecture on my part, but what the president did not do was fire him. No evidence at all that I've been able to find that he was actually fired. There's also a legend that the railroad uh, settled the various suits that were filed. The perception is that all of the families of all of the victims filed lawsuits, and that Katie not only paid each of them, X amount of money. It depends on what source you see. It gave them a lifetime pass on the Katy Railroad. Well, I went to the record storage area for McLennan County and actually looked up the lawsuits. Only two lawsuits were filed, and I actually held them and read both of them, probably for the first time since 1896. They'd just been filed away and covered in dust. Anyway, the settlement was not for what people claim it was, and there was no mention whatsoever of a lifetime pass on the Katy Railroad. So the railroad got off pretty cheap on the deal.
Pretty light, right? And you go and you talk about the epilogue, the lives of the people who were affected. And I one of the fascinating things in the book is the appendix. I would not know that there was 150 of these staged crashes all over the country. It's really incredible.
Yeah, that was a real surprise. I knew, I think going in or pretty early on, I found that there had been other crashes, but I didn't realize that it became a fad until I started researching this book. Uh, there was a character out of Iowa named Joe Connolly, and there's no evidence that he uh, came to Crush to see the event, but like I said, it made newspapers across the nation. So he surely must have seen an article about the crash in Texas, and so he decided he was a farmer by background, but he decided to go in the train crashing business and proceeded uh, to do just that. And the amazing thing is, he started in the 1890s and he continued doing that all the way through the early 1930s. I mean, it's just amazing. He made a career out of it. And as you said, there were some 130 or so crashes literally all across the nation. Now, Connolly did not do all of them. It became such a thing that some other promoters tried to, but Connolly did the most of them and became most noted. In fact, he earned his nickname that way. He became known as Joe Head On Connolly, and did it until he retired, and I think it was 1932 or 1934. But
Yeah.
and then Crush, Billy Crush, not only stayed with the railroad, he ended up with a 57-year career uh, in the railroad industry. Most of that time with the Katy Railroad. He eventually became a vice president, and finally, uh, at some point in the late 1930s, they gave him a kind of a post or pre-retirement position. Sort of kicked him upstairs so that he could take it easy until he could retire. But he did retire, and what I found really touching about him was two things, or maybe I should say interesting rather than touching. The first interesting thing I found was that if he had any regrets for having essentially killed three people and wounded six or nine others, he never expressed it, or uh, it was never written about. There were, you know, it was such a quirky story that there've been a steady uh, stream of stories done on it over the years. Though a fair amount of time it passed. It was not until the 1930s that I the first kind of reminiscent story about the crash appeared. So for 25 years or so, it was just kind of forgotten. But that was interesting, and the second thing interesting about Crush, the person, was that he would hang out. He had pushed for the construction of a substation for Katy in Dallas. Dallas had a large Union station, but Crush had seen to the construction of a smaller station in the ritzy Highland Park area of Dallas, and uh, for most of the rest of his life, he would go to that station and sit there and wait until the Texas Special came in every day, and would be there to greet people as they got off the train. Just amazing. I mean, obviously the railroad, especially since he didn't have kids, must have been, basically what the rest of his life was about.
Yeah, remarkable. Yeah, I mean, it's a great book, and at the snapshot in time, and you've done such great research. You've integrated so many pictures and some of the pictures of this guy Dean, and really captured that moment in time. Is there anything you'd like to add, or anything I missed before we wrap up the discussion about train crash at Crush,
Well,
Texas?
I think a good ending is what happened to Alfred Streeter. He was the guy, who came up with the concept of crashing trains. Uh, he made, as I said, a ton of money as an inventor of railroad brake parts, but he apparently had a weakness for female companionship. In the end, it was discovered that, let me back up. The Chicago police would periodically raid various hotels in Chicago that were believed to be fronts for prostitution or other sorts of illicit activity. So at some point in the I think it was around 1908 or 7, somewhere in there, they raided a hotel in Chicago, and one of the people they found there was an underage gal, and in searching her room, they discovered that she was Streeter's young mistress, and so they found a bunch of love letters between the two of them, and apparently he was paying for piano lessons for her, and made her all sorts of promises about turning her into a star. Anyway, because of those letters, they were able to file on him for whatever Illinois' statute is in regard to statutory rape. Uh, and then, as they began to investigate him, they found that not only was he married while he supported this girlfriend, he was married to somebody else as well. So he was both a bigamist and an adulterer. And apparently, it all caught up with him when he got filed on. He decided it would be nice to take a long vacation to Canada, where at that time there was no extradition treaty. So he went and hid out in Canada, but he was well connected and still had enough money left, where Chicago, being as generally corrupt as it was back in that era, somehow miraculously the indictment against him ended up being quashed. And so, but he ended up dying in basically an insane asylum. So, talented a guy as he was, he did not have a happy ending.
Yeah, that's unfortunate. And where's the best place for people to get Train Crash at Crush, Texas?
Well, happily, of course, you can get it on Amazon. It's right there for sale. It's on all the other major bookstore sites, Barnes and Noble and all the discount stores and places like that. So it's pretty easy to find, and I hope people will enjoy reading about it. Like I say, it's a pretty quirky thing, but it was certainly something that people can use to get their mind off of the depressing international situation right now.
Well, this is true. Yeah, right now on Amazon in the U.S., it has 15 5-star ratings, very well deserved, and really, it just is a piece of Americana. It's a piece of history I didn't know about. I'm glad that I read through it. So, really great job. And the best place to contact you is through your website. Say your website again for me.
Yes, it's all one word, MikeCoxAuthor.com.
Gotcha.
I didn't come up with that name, but it was the only one I could get. So
gotcha. And people can contact you through there, or do you have other social media or anything? Okay.
Yes, you can reach me through that website.
So I will put that in the show notes. Thank you so much for your time. Really great discussion. Again, the title of the book is Train Crash at Crush, Texas, America's Deadliest Publicity Stunt by Mike Cox. Thanks so much for your time. Still there?
Thank you for having me on. Yes, it was a lot of fun.
All right. Stay there.